right, nothing but potatoes. Popeye said, "Here I yam." Oh, well, a little bit of humor here. I've got 3 jackets and 2 shirts on. A little cool. You know, when the wind is buzzing down on you in this park, besides the cold, the annoying traffic going by, but I'm relegated to this position. I have to be near the sidewalk, he says, but I don't want to be within 6 feet of people. I'm going to rename myself Mr. 6 Feet, because I insist on being 6 feet apart from people, and a lot of people look at me like I'm nuts. Most of the time I end up walking in the street because people dominate the sidewalk and won't let you by unless you brush shoulders with them. Yesterday somebody coughed behind me waiting in line to get something at the store. And he didn't even cover his mouth. And he wasn't even there buying something. He just was looking around. Wow. Anyway, we're here, the end of this study page here. And look for, thus the entire creation was made subject to vanity. And that's quoting from the Bible. It's a reflection of the second law of thermodynamics, which is one of the laws that evolution, creation, whichever, seems to follow religiously in order for it to come to the point that we see today, which is the most plausible. Well, the question is, how did those laws get there in the first place? Evolution couldn't have created them by an intelligent designer, because that would make it creation, the God of the Bible. Apparently it did. Thus the entire creation was made subject to vanity. The earth began to wax old as doth the garment, and ultimately shall perish. Since all flesh is made of the earth's physical elements, it is also subject to the law of decay and death, and as grass withereth and falleth away. It is a universal experience that all things, living or non-living, eventually wear out, run down, grow old, decay, and pass into the dust. This condition is so universal that finally it was formalized about 100 years ago by several scientists, Carnot, Clausius, Kelvin, and other scientists, into a fundamental scientific law now called the Second Law of Thermodynamics. This law states that all systems, if left to themselves, tend to be degraded or disordered. It has also been called the law of morpholysis, from a Greek word meaning loosing of structure. Physical systems which, whether watches or suns, eventually wear out. Organisms grow old and die. Hereditary changes in species are caused by gene mutations, sudden random disruptions in their highly ordered genetic systems, which in many cases have resulted in deterioration or extinction of the species itself. Even apart from mutations, the deterioration of the environment has often led to species extinction. Instead of all things being made, that is, disorganized into complex systems as they were in Creation Week in the Bible, they are now being unmade, becoming disorganized and simple. Instead of life and growth, there comes decay and death. Instead of evolution, there is degeneration. This, then, is the true origin of the strange law of disorder and decay. The universally applicable, all-important second law of thermodynamics. Herein is the secret of all that's wrong with the world. Man is the sinner and has brought God's curse on the earth. Didn't have to be that way, but an intelligent designer organized that way, and that's the way it came out. Let's go on to the next. K75. Singing stars provide evidence of a creator God. Where were you, Job, when I, God, laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched the measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? And who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together, and all the angels shouted for joy. Sounds like a poem. Evidently, there's some physical evidence of this. Plausible. according to the observation of radio astrophysicists, stars by radio wave context are singing to us. Stars throughout the universe are emitting radio wave energy, and these stars emitting radio wave energy, but that there is a music on those radio waves of energy, not only music emitted, but the music being emitted is in a major key, not a minor one. The music being emitted from the stars is harmonious. NASA compared the music being emitted from these star sources to the instruments of an orchestral creation. It seems that everywhere we look, creation is orchestrated. Recently, with some special plasma ionized research units, NASA found that Neptune and some of the other planets in our solar system emit a signal which sounds like whistling, as if it were whistling a tune. First of all, there was a firmament of water above the Earth in crystalline form. Crystals take on a very special characteristic. When energized with a current of electromagnetic energy, crystals amplify long radio waves. Each morning before the flood, as the Earth turned toward the sun, when the angle was just right, the energized radio waves reaching the Earth through the universe were amplified by the crystalline firmament canopy. Each morning before the flood, the radio wave signals from these stars or music could be heard on Earth. Light energy does something to the human body and to all life forms, even if it cannot be seen. In the early hours of the morning, as the fiber optic nature of this crystalline canopy above the Earth was transferring light from the sunny side of the globe, it would have very gently enhanced that light. If an individual were asleep and could not see the light, as the light were enhanced, that individual would begin to stir. The light would be received in the biologic mechanism of his body. The light would gently induce the individual awake. The crystalline water in the firmament canopy before the flood would filter out the harmful shortwave radiation. The canopy would permit the long waves of energy to go right along through it. In fact, the long waves of energy would not only be able to pass through the canopy, but would be enhanced or amplified by it. And while the individual sleeping before the flood was gently induced awake by the light about dawn he would have been also greeted by the amplified sound of the radio wave energy being emitted by the stars. So NASA has found that there are bursts of energies from these sources, but there would also be sustained crescendo diminishes and terminations. There would all be a new music every day. So we've been through this before. Let's move on down. We see that the description, Dr. Boss says, of the restored earth found in Isaiah 35 shows that the forest will again sing. So we're taking the Bible and saying, well, okay, what evidence do we have of that or plausibility? Around an individual before the flood in this canopy context, the radio waves from the stars were enhanced by this canopy in the morning hours. The crystalline structure of the sand would pick up and amplify these radio waves. Finally, there are qualities in the cellular structures of plants which would cause the reeds to vibrate. So the forest began to sing. Anyone who knew his creator could not help but respond. Only now have we been able to put together this orchestral creation model, balancing out all of these elements into an articulated form. And the biblical record explains reality far better than the evolutionary concept does. So this poetry in the Bible ends up being reality. We have the worldwide flood, which we looked at also. So let's move on. We've looked at this before. We have the incredibly complex design of all life forms. This design points to a supreme designer, the God of the Bible. Dr. Ball says, we find an immediate conflict between the concepts of creation and evolution when we look at life forms. We find an information that shows all of life to be extremely complicated. Scientists have been able to give an assimilative number to the amount of exponential bits of information contained in that total inorganic non-living universe. It comes to 255 exponential bits of information. These bits are not to be confused with computer bits, but are a compound bit assimilation. Yet the human cell has over 20 billion exponential bits of information. It is absolutely impossible for this inorganic universe to have produced one living cell of any structure in any biological observation. It's just too simplistic. What this really means is that life had to be designed, and it appeared fully functional and fully operational. John D. Morris says of the Institute for Creation Research, Christianity and evolution cannot both be true. Evolution is, at its very essence, an atheistic explanation of the world around us. Consider the following oft-repeated quote from Sir Julian Huxley, who, until his recent death, was perhaps the world's leading spokesman for evolution. Darwin pointed out, he said, that no supernatural designer was needed. Since natural selection could account for any known form of life, there was no room for a supernatural agency in its evolution. We can dismiss entirely all ideas of a supernatural overriding mind being responsible for the evolutionary process. On the other hand, Scripture in many places and in many ways identifies God as creator and claims that his creation was an act of forethought, of planning, and of design. Supernatural processes were used to accomplish this design, not just natural processes. These two concepts, supernatural design versus natural processes operating by chance, represent the two views of origins and are opposite. They cannot both be true. Nobel Prize-winning zoologist Jacques Monod said it this way: it necessarily follows that chance alone is the source of every innovation. Pure chance, absolutely free but blind, at the very root of the stupendous edifice of evolution. The recent edition of the authoritative Encyclopedia Britannica informs us that Darwin did two things. He showed that evolution was a fact contradicting literal interpretations of scriptural legends of creation, and that its cause, natural selection, was automatic with no room for divine guidance or design. So at that time, many Christians believed in evolution, but they must come to realize that the evolutionary way of thinking is a logical necessity to believe, if and only if there has been no supernatural input in nature. Furthermore, if evolution is true, the entire Christian faith is a sham. Dr. William Provine, professor of history and biology at Cornell University and authors of many anti-creation articles, wrote recently that Darwin recognized if natural selection explained adaptations and evolution by descent were true, then the argument from design was dead, and it all went with it, namely the existence of a personal God, free will, life after death, immutable, unchangeable moral laws, and the ultimate meaning of life. The problem is, evolution is not a fact. Evolution is not even a category of things that could ever be a scientific fact. It simply is a worldview about the past, an historical reconstruction. It is a way to interpret scientific data, such as rocks, fossils, complex living systems which exist in the present. It is a potential answer to the question, what happened in the unobserved past to make the present to be in the way? As we have seen, this answer encompasses far more than merely a scientific proposal. It's currently understood by leading evolutionists. It embraces strict naturalism and anti-God philosophy and results in the denial of the major doctrines of Scripture. Darwin, in his writings, letters, memoirs, promoted natural selection as a means by which the incredible design obvious in every living system could be derived through purely mechanistic, naturalistic processes. He devoted great energy to refuting the writings of William Paley, in which Paley reasoned that one can infer from the functional complexity of a system that intelligence was necessary in its formation. just as the complex watch necessarily